Hey everyone, welcome back to Tactical Magic Podcast. This is Molly Mandelberg, your host, and I'm excited to bring something slightly more personal to you today than I often bring. I often have a lot of leaders who are talking about amazing modalities. Today we're talking about something that I have dug pretty deep into. So to bust the bubble, the secret's now out. I'm about 3 weeks away from finishing my psilocybin facilitation training in the state of Oregon. And I'm really excited about being a part of this work. And so I wanted to bring someone brilliant to the podcast who could have a conversation with me about this, who also happens to be my teacher or trainer or facilitator in the training program that I'm in. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a second talking about the magic of psychedelics and using it as a tool for healing and growth. It's not just about mastering technology. It's not just about brand or messaging. It's not just about making more money. It's about showing up in a big way so your people can find you. This is about bringing your most wild and authentic self into the hustle and grind. Welcome to Tactical Magic, a business strategies podcast for the warrior goddess entrepreneur. So Travis Kern is a licensed acupuncturist who owns and operates an internal medicine clinic in Southwest Portland, Oregon. He has worked as a clinician for many years and recognized that often patients' healing was limited by some other aspect of their history or their narratives around their own health. He often joked about wishing he had access to a shaman he could refer his patients to when they needed assistance breaking through health problems that had a more esoteric cause. When Oregon launched the legal framework for psilocybin facilitation in 2003, it seemed that all that wishful thinking was manifesting, and he was in some of the first training cohorts for legal facilitators. Based on his own journeying with psilocybin and serving as a trip sitter for friends during their own exploration, he knew that psilocybin could be a tool to further the healing of his patients who had hit a block. After finishing his training program and looking out into the world of legal facilitation, he realized that there was a need to bring more conventional clinical skills to the toolkit of facilitators. And so the idea of creating Acadia Professional Learning, that's the training institute that I've been a part of for the last few months, was born. Along with his wife, who's an educator with more than 15 years of teaching experience, he built a state-approved training curriculum that combines the best practices of both the psilocybin journey community and professional clinicians. Welcome to the show, Travis.
Hey, thanks so much, Molly. That's such an exciting intro. I'm like, oh, I would like to talk to me now. That's great.
Oh, yay, we nailed it then.
Yes, perfect.
I love that. Your bio is very thorough too. So I feel like we've covered some ground about how you got to this work. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about why you chose this path. I mean, it sounds like you already had a pretty beautiful clinical practice going. And tell us a little bit more about that tension of, patients come and they receive this medicine and it should work. And there's this other aspect that's maybe holding it at bay. What does that look like? How did that sort of show up and come to mind?
Yeah, so over the last 5 years in my practice here in Portland, I shifted a lot of my work from sort of conventional musculoskeletal pain problems that a lot of acupuncturists do into more and more internal medicine work. Particularly in my practice, I deal a lot in digestive disorders and insomnia problems and also some anxiety, depression. And we use a combination of acupuncture and herbs to solve that problem. And it was really remarkable how potent and powerful that medicine is for most people. I mean, we can take a problem that's an 8, 9, 10 out of 10 problem and bring it down to a 1 or a 0 over the course of, 3, 4, 5 months, right? It was really great. But there was a not insignificant subset of people who we could take an 8 problem and get it down to a 2 problem, which is much better, obviously. But we couldn't crack that 2 mark, right? I mean, we're pulling every single tool out of the Chinese medicine toolkit. And, again, people are feeling better. So they're like, oh, I mean, I can probably just deal with 2. But that's not my preference, right? Like my preference is to get them to a full transformation back to a state of health that will, leave them thriving, right? Feeling good. And so over sometimes in case many years working with these clients, trying to peel back this 2 to 0 kind of space, it would become increasingly apparent that there were other things beyond the Chinese medicine diagnostic things that were holding back this transformation, right? So I'm taking the pulse, I'm looking at the tongue, I'm doing abdominal exams, I'm doing all the questioning, and our diagnostic system says these herbs should work, right? And yet we're not, right? What's the deal? And of course, once you've been seeing a patient for a long time, it's easy to build rapport. You know a lot about them, you know a lot about their history and their struggles. And almost to a patient, there was some kind of traumatic barrier that ranged from physical and sexual assault all the way to just sort of emotional, I call it like a sort of emotional awashness, right? People didn't feel grounded in the world around them, and all the way to including a sort of existential dread about being a modern person, and that this stuff had embedded themselves so deeply inside these patients that there was just this wall, right? And so the thing in the bio about joking about having a shaman, I mean, we in Chinese medicine school, is probably not surprising to most people that you come across some pretty interesting folks, right? People who have a wide variety of skills and experiences. And we would come across people from Chinese lineage traditions, from Asia and other places who had something similar to what I think we would call shamanism or a shamanistic idea. And I was like, man, gosh, I wish Liu Ming was around, or I wish Liu He was around. We could tap some of that shaman energy and try to break through this, because it's not a skill set that I have. It's not a lineage that I come from. And when all of the sort of, uh, I guess, rigmarole around legalizing psilocybin began in Oregon in 2020, I didn't even really give it that much thought. I was just like, oh, that's cool. I'm glad we're getting on that progressive train, legalizing another thing. That sounds great. But then as the rules started to roll out and people were talking about it more and it was in the media more, I thought, wait a minute, I like mushrooms. I've had positive experience with them. I did a lot of trip sitting and like holding space for people. I've seen what this can do for folks. But this was a younger version of myself back in college and just after, and we were all in that kind of psychonaut vibe, right? We're just trying to see what's out there, man. We're going to take some mushrooms and we're going to see what's there. And I don't know that it was super targeted, right? I mean, we did have intention and we had some reflection and we had talked to a lot of people, basically the people we were buying mushrooms from, who were like, hey, you really got to treat this with some respect, etc. But also, like, I don't know, I was in my early 20s. I don't know how much respect I had for anything at that point. And so we had some really amazing experiences, but I hadn't really considered how we could use it in a targeted clinical way, right? With like a real intensive purpose. And so when the courses started coming online in Oregon, sort of into 22, beginning 23, I was like, you know what, let me just pop in here and let's do it. Let's get the certification. Let's see what the deal is. And then maybe it's a tool I can use with my patients. And so that's kind of what led me to it in this space, was really trying to tap that previous life experience where I knew that psilocybin mushrooms could be transformative, and try and parlay that into a clinical outcome.
Yeah, and to solve a, annoying issue of why can't we get that last two down to a zero? Let's
Yeah.
see if we can through, an added modality. So one of the conversations this isn't going to air in real time. This is probably going to come out next week. But one of the things we were actually talking about in class last night is the placebo effect and how that sort of component has been messing up research right and left for decades. And so I'd love to just bring in a little bit of the concept of a placebo, or also the reason why this new clinical version of doing mushrooms, because I also, had those early 20 experiences, maybe late 20s too, maybe early 30s, who knows,
So
exploring and
yeah.
of looking for something, but maybe not doing it in a container that was the most conducive to the transformation that could have been possible were it in a container like that. So I just want to bring to the conversation, like, what is set and setting? How does this sort of clinical version of a psilocybin experience, like, how is it useful to us? Why is it so exciting that this is happening right now? And how is it sort of different than that casual way of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's had any experience with psilocybin mushrooms knows and probably has experienced that the physical setting in which they take the mushrooms, and also kind of how they were feeling emotionally, mentally, spiritually before they took the mushrooms, probably had some effect on their overall experience, right? Particularly if you've experimented a lot, you've been able to compare one journey experience to another. The phrase that you use, set and setting, is sort of emerged in, I would say, the last 15 years or so among people who are organizedly dealing with psilocybin. So that would have been underground therapy spaces, and then also emerging research that began kind of in the early 2000s. And what that refers to is a person's mindset. That's the first part, set. And then setting, of course, is the physical space. And what all of the research and all of the anecdotal information we've gained from people who've been actually doing this work underground for a long time is that the mindset that a person enters the journey with, right? So what are their expectations? What are they hoping to achieve? How prepared are they to deal with a challenging experience, right? What sort of aphorisms and mantras do they have access to? And also, what's their history relative to those things? Really, really influences the likelihood that the journey experience will be transformative, right? And then the physical setting itself makes a huge difference, right? So a comfortable space, a warm space, aesthetically pleasing space with good lighting and music that fits the taste of the journeyer. All of these things create, and you use this word that I love so much, create the container for the experience, right? So as a facilitator, we're working with the client to help make sure that they understand what this journey process is and to help walk them through, talking them through what their goals and expectations are and sort of compare that to what's most likely, what things they need to be aware of, so that you're, sort of over time in that conversation shaping the set and the setting to have a positive outcome. It's interesting that you mentioned the placebo piece, right? In class, we were talking about how placebo as a word is kind of a dismissive word, right? Like, oh, it's just placebo. Like, we don't need to pay attention to it. It's probably not real. It's just placebo, right? But of course, for like, at this point, since the 50s, I mean, we're going on like 70 years now of people doing clinical research and having to disregard whole sections of their research cohort because they were affected by belief that they had the medicine. And not affected in like a, oh, I just thought I did, but in fact, their biometric parameters, their heart rate, their blood pressure, their tumor growth, their any number of things from the mundane to the quite amazing are actually affected by their belief that they had an intervention, right? And we've thought for years that that was and in many ways, I think it is a useful tool to say, well, if I'm giving you this medication and I'm giving you a not medication, if the not medication is performing as well as the medication, should we do that? And usually the answer has been no, right? Because it hasn't been performing better than placebo. The part that was missing from that for me that some researchers are really getting into now is like, well, wait a minute, hold up. What about that placebo part? Should we lean into that? How are we facilitating fundamental physical, mental, emotional, spiritual change by the mere belief and suggestion that change is possible, right? And for me, that fits into the work that I do in my day job, right? I mean, the truth is, what I've observed in clinical practice is that it is equally as important that I choose the right acupuncture points and create a good herbal formula as it is for my client to understand fundamentally that their disease pattern can change, right? That in fact, they're not static. Like, you are not a person with Crohn's in a definitive way. That can never be anything other than that, right? Understanding, believing, internalizing the idea that human beings are dynamic, changeable creatures is as important to making an intervention as anything else, right? And sometimes the best part about having a tool like acupuncture and herbs, and in this case, psilocybin, is that the tool helps to build the belief, right? Like, I use the tool and you go, whoa, I feel so different. And then that sort of creates a cascade effect on the story, right? That says, oh, actually, what he was telling me about me not just being defined by this one thing, that may be true. I'm experiencing it right now. And so you sort of crack that door open, right? That says, actually, no, humans are dynamic and changing. And then it's a cascade effect. I mean, it's phenomenal. Once you crack that door open, what kind of change is possible?
Yeah, I love that. And I forget who was in the video that mentioned that the facilitator themselves creating a container like this, whether it's through acupuncture, whether it's through hypnotherapy, which is in my background, that we're sort of infusing this container of this event, this experience, this, health intervention of some kind or well-being intervention of some kind with that narrative that change is possible. And when someone is like, okay, sign me up, I'm willing to put my body in the space, in the chair or in the facilitation room or, in the whatever space has been created saying this is possible, there's some part of you already invested in it. And so that's why I love the placebo effect sort of data that's out there, is because it is saying you believing matters as much as anything you add to your situation. So if you go into a situation with the belief, it's just that much bigger of a potential shift. And
Yeah.
like how liberating that relates to business. Anyone out there who's an entrepreneur, you believing that your launch is going to go well is as important as you putting the launch together. And anybody going into a psilocybin experience, you believing that you're going to walk out of that room with something shifted or something greater possible is as important as you showing up to the room in the first place. And so
Mhm.
that's one of the really cool things to be a facilitator is you get to be part of that belief getting instilled. And it doesn't have to be that challenging. It's really just saying, hey, we've seen it. It's possible. It happened for other people. If it's something you want, let's come in and talk about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, there's an interesting tension when you talk to people about the impact of belief on their lived reality, right? Because in our culture, it's easy because we have this sort of puritanical, moralistic structure as the sort of base beat of our culture that if we say to a person, hey, your belief system is actually impacting your life, right? And so then if a person, say, has chronic pain or they have problematic relationships or they, whatever it is, right? And you're talking to them, hey, headspace is a really great thing that you can adjust. They change your relationship to these things, improve happiness, etc. And if that person doesn't make those changes, some people internalize the message as having a kind of judgment quality, right? Like their failure to change their headspace makes them a weak person, a bad person, a failed person. And one of the things that's really, really challenging to talk about with people is to take away the moralistic quality of the relationship between belief and outcomes, right? So if we know that changing your relationship to your chronic pain can begin the process of transforming your body and mind away from chronic pain, but because of life circumstances, history, trauma, whatever, a person isn't able to do that, there isn't a moral dimension to that. It's just a series of events, right? Like a person wasn't able to make this change, therefore the pain remains, right? If we can help them make that change, the pain will go down. But there's no good person, weak person, bad person factor. And that's something that I think is hard for a lot of people because people have internalized a lot of guilt around what they themselves have not been able to achieve. And so I'm always a little cautious when we talk to people about the relationship between belief and outcomes because people are really hard on themselves. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times in a clinical setting I'm like, hey, person, you got to cut yourself some slack, right? Like, I mean, you are killing it out there. You're doing the best you can. Stop beating yourself up about that, right? Life's a practice. We're going to keep moving forward on it. And that's actually the thing that I love about psilocybin because I can sit in the clinic room and talk to a sober-minded person, person to person, and they'll hear me. I see them hearing me. I watch them intellectually trying to internalize this idea that they should cut themselves some slack. And then the very next week, they're going to report back how their week went, and I'm going to hear them ripping themselves open again, right? What happens with psilocybin in a well-targeted journey, right, is that when people are under the influence of that mushroom, the ability to understand things, I'll say, sort of embody and really internalize an understanding is so much more possible. You're able to take something that you know here in your head and know it here in your body, feel it in all of your extremities in a way that it's so funny because anyone who's had this experience will probably sympathize that you get out of a journey and you're thinking like, God, why did I spend so much time stressing about that? Like it's so not important. And it just feels so obvious and so matter of fact. And yet you spent the previous 5 years like rolling that around in your mind, talking to your therapist about it, trying to get your mind around it. And you knew it, but you didn't know it. And so something like psilocybin comes in and it cracks open that door. It says, hey, wait a minute, you can actually see all of these connections out in front of you in a meaningful way. And now you can actually really feel, really know this thing that's just been floating in your mind for a long time. And I think that's why it's so helpful in helping people to transition from stuck states into healthier ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that value of taking the moral compass out of shifting your mindset. And that if it, because it's sort of a self-fulfilling thing. If you're having trouble shifting your mindset and then you're making yourself wrong for that, it's like this resistance mechanical thing that just sticks and gridlocks you right there. And that is one of the beautiful things. One of my favorite analogies for like neuroplasticity, which is what psilocybin is really amazing at helping us do, is saying, your brain's been going down this channel. Some people imagine it like snow hill that you're sledding down and there's like a groove that everybody keeps sledding down, your brain is just used to going down this one pathway. I kind of like to imagine as path through a forest or through a jungle, and there's like a well-trodden path that your brain is just naturally getting into the groove of all the time. And that to do mindset work or to open your mind through a psilocybin experience, you're basically taking a like detour off of that well-trodden path, off of that well-sledded, groove. And you're more able to get off of that groove into something new, into something different, into a higher vantage point or a greater perspective or just more awareness around a situation. And that you can do, I mean, I do it. I do the daily journaling, I do the daily meditating, I do the bushwhacking with like dexterity, but I do it every day because I'm trying to build that muscle because I know what my life was like when I wasn't doing that. And to have
Yeah.
something, you could literally put yourself in a room legally, be supported, be in a safe container, and have sort of a shortcut. Instead of a machete, maybe you've got one of those, electrical chainsaw
Yeah.
bushwhacker things. Suddenly you're able to
Yeah.
cut through the jungle with just more ease, more effortlessness, more access to those other pathways that now you can make them the well-trodden ones that your brain will naturally go down. So I just like that image of why our brains sort of stay in a certain way. And also the
Mhm.
encouragement to maybe stop making yourself wrong for being on the well-trodden path. It might be very well-trodden. Of course, your brain is going to go there. It takes some, like, sometimes an outside influence or force
Yeah.
or a lot of muscle building to get yourself out of that groove. So you're not wrong, you're not bad, and you do deserve to bushwhack to another pathway with as much ease as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, bodies they're hyper efficient, right? I mean, they're not going to waste time trying something new if there's a path right in front of it, right?
Yeah.
So we have to bring that to bear, right? We have to do a little bit work, or in this case, use some special intervention to remind the body, oh, wait a minute, there's actually an entire slope here, not just this one well-sledded path, you know?
Yeah. Totally. So I just want to call out the fact that there's probably a lot of people listening who want to try this work. We say go for it, find a safe place to do it. And, right now there's a lot of opportunity to do it in a legal, really like regulated, and that to me means safe container to do it in with amazing people like Travis and almost also me. And also some people out there are like, you know what, I want to do this work. I didn't come to this from a place of I need a thing to turn into a career. I have a beautiful, thriving career, and enough signs showed up that led me to I'm adding this to my life and career. So I think there's going to be people coming at it from all different ways. This is something I'm so passionate about. I want to make it my life. And also, this is something like you that will enhance the effect I'm having with my clients right now, or that will add into the sort of repertoire of magic that I have to share with people. So will you tell us a little about Acadia and what you guys are offering and what's coming up soon?
Yeah, so Acadia Professional Learning is the company that my wife and I started to do education on training people to be facilitators, right? And so we launched our inaugural cohort is the one that Molly is in right now in January. And we're going to be doing three cohorts this year. So applications are open right now for the spring cohort, which will begin in April 2024. And it's a 12-week course, 120 hours of time. 60 of those are synchronous, 60 asynchronous, plus a little practicum requirement. The state of Oregon created some pretty rigorous educational standards, right? That all of the curriculums that have been approved by the state have to meet in order to qualify to, basically give a certificate for licensure. We don't grant the licensure, but we just say, hey, this person's passed the course and they're qualified. Our course is a little bit different than others in that, look, when people knew that this was coming online, a lot of people were excited about it, right? So these early courses, people put them together, people who had been working in the underground spaces, people who were just themselves super interested and wanted to provide an opportunity. And so we got courses that were approved by the state, but whose sort of educational styles and the material brought to bear was pretty diverse, right? I mean, there's a lot of ways you can teach an educational standard. And one of the things that I noticed was missing in my cohort and then also in other folks I sort of met in this process was that there wasn't a lot of what I think of as sort of conventional clinical knowledge, right, around working with patients. Well, I call them patients. In the facilitating space, we call them clients, right? But what I mean by that is when you go to medical school of any kind, Western medical school, chiropractic school, Chinese medicine school, there's a huge amount of time that's spent training students how to interface with clients. How do you talk to them? How do you stay respectful? How do you engage with their bodies? Asking permission, consent. How do we create safe spaces? What's our legal exposure? How do we deliver quality medicine? I mean, it's literally the full gamut of every question that a person who deals with a client or a patient in a relatively intimate space like a treatment room needs to consider. And the truth is that a lot of people who were running training courses or a lot of people who were looking for this training didn't know these things. They didn't go to medical schools, right? They were coming from their own personal backgrounds. And so Marcy and I were like, I would love to design a course that sort of tries to bridge the gap, as I see it, between the more kind of esoteric, indigenous, shamanistic qualities of psilocybin facilitation and a much more clinical side where we have these kind of more rigid understandings of things. And look, everybody out there knows that there's a lot of problems with the medical system, right? You just go to your doctor, you know that there's not a lot of time, there's a lot of paperwork, it feels very clinical, it feels very impersonal, right? And I'm not suggesting that we want to make things impersonal in the psilocybin space. In fact, quite the opposite. But I don't think there's any reason not to take the best practices of that space and combine them with the best practices of another, right? And so we definitely know about what it means to be responsible for a patient or a client, what it means to take accountability for a person's transformation, and how to talk to people about that. So our course is designed to meet all of those goals. We wanted it to be something that would be research-based, that would be science-based, but that would also have the ability to talk about philosophical things like the placebo effect and the nature of man in the universe, right? And so I think we're doing a pretty decent job of achieving that at the moment. And we're excited to keep sharing it with more people. We've also decided to try and make the program pretty price competitive. If you're looking to get into this space, it's pretty expensive or can be pretty expensive. And because my wife and I are the teachers and the administrators, we're able to keep those costs a little lower than other folks who have to employ a lot of people to do the teaching. And so it's working out pretty well.
I will say, having, being a student of yours as well, I have a bachelor's degree. I have, gone through certifications for hypnotherapy, for NLP, for transformational leadership. I've been to lots of workshops, like hundreds of them, and I've led hundreds of workshops and created and launched dozens of courses for myself and my clients. And you guys have put together an amazing curriculum and also an amazing platform through which to learn. So I just want to really highlight the fact that I've been around the block when it comes to learning new material, and you guys have curated a really effective learning system in addition to a lot of amazing resources that do keep me interested, because you're not only bringing to the table like the latest research and the most important facts that we need to know and the conversations that are out there right now to be aware of, but also the actual like structure of setting yourself up as a business owner in this kind of facilitation space and what exactly we need to set up to be aware of and to keep ourselves in the safest way possible, the legality of the state, as that information is continually being updated by the state on a regular basis. So I'm really grateful that I chose Acadia as the place that I came to learn from. And yeah, I'm really excited to be on the precipice of bringing this body of work to life through myself as well. So for anybody out there who's interested, you can go to acadiaprofessional.com. That's ACADIA professional.com. If you're in the Portland area, I highly probably recommend checking Travis out if you're looking for any kind of health and wellness support as well, because like he said, he's got an amazing Chinese medicine practice. Anything else you want to share about the time frame of people applying and, showing up for this next spring cohort?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for that, Molly. I really appreciate the accolades. We're happy to have you in the class, and it's great to have so many amazing people in there from so many diverse backgrounds and professions. And it is a changing target, right? And for anyone who's interested in this world, it's important to recognize that the rules were made up a year and a half ago, and they continue to be updated and changed. And so we're all kind of living on the edge, trying to stay up to date and deliver that to folks. So as I said, applications are open right now for the spring cohort. Those are going to stay open through the first week of April, and then classes begin on April 9th, I believe. And so basically you've got between now and I think the 4th or 5th of April to submit an application. It's all online. You can read all about the course, all the details. We've got a pretty robust FAQ. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to us. There's an email link there to contact, and we're happy to talk to folks about it. But there are some current limitations, right? I mean, if you are interested in this work, but you don't live in Oregon, you can definitely take our course, but you wouldn't be able to legally practice in any other place besides Oregon. We get a lot of questions about that from people across the country who are super interested, which is awesome. And you can definitely come and learn from us and learn all the best practices, but the course is definitely tailored for people living and working in Oregon.
Yeah. And I'll just add to, from the working in Oregon aspect, it's 2024 right now. 2025 is apparently when the Oregon resident requirement is going to go away. So if you're an Oregon resident and you're thinking about doing this work, I would get in and get trained and get licensed before 2025 if possible, because that's when the floodgates are going to kind of open for people from all over the country probably to be able to get trained and licensed in Oregon. So get it while the getting's good. If this is a trajectory for you, because of the nature of, plant medicine and this sort of spiritual aspect that this kind of work has come through, I'm guessing if this work is for you, there's been signs and it's time to move in that direction. And the fact that you came across this podcast episode may be one of those signs. For me, I was looking at going back to school for something else and got accepted. I won't get into that now. I might still go that route eventually. But I found myself at the Thanksgiving dinner table with someone who was asking me about psilocybin and talking about how it's legal in Oregon and all this stuff, and asked me to basically trip sit for them. And I was like, interesting. I haven't, added that to my repertoire in a professional way with like somebody who's not a close friend. Let me look into that. And within 48 hours, I had applied to Acadia Professional because there all these things started showing up that was like, you're going down this path. And I was like, okay, I'll go. So yeah, there are maybe signs. A lot of people watching this tactical magic into this show are into things like signs. So trust the guidance. If it's your path, go apply. Travis and Marcy are really amazing at getting your questions answered. And yeah, life's too short not to leap. So thanks for being on the show. Any last words of wisdom you want to share, Travis?
Look, I think we hit a lot of the big highlights here, but let's just re-underline the fact that the nature of being a human is dynamic, and we just need to keep reminding ourselves of that, even when it feels like we're stuck. Any kind of change is possible.
Hell yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Molly.
Yeah. And for anyone out there who maybe isn't quite ready to leap into Acadia, I just want to throw a little shout out to remind you that the Wild Hearts Rise Up app is out there. There's a lot of meditations in the energy magic section of that app. It's free for the first month. So if you've been feeling that bushwhacking is just too hard right now, you want a little guided meditation to tap into to make it easier. They're mostly between 7 and 10 minutes. And yeah, if you like it, keep using it. If you don't like it, you can get rid of the app within a month, but I highly recommend trying it out. Wild Hearts Rise Up in the App Store or the Google Play Store. And as always, whatever happens, keep asking big questions and taking bold action, because you are here for a reason. We'll see you next time.